Section 1 of The Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. The Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Chapter 1. The Comrades' Tryst.
"A bowl of claret, Father Corn."
The raucous voice of Big Ernestine rose above the hubbub in the smoke-begrimed tavern.
"Some claret, and let it be good,"
repeated the drab, a big, fair damsel with puckered eyes and features worn by dissipation. Father Corn had heard the first time, but he was in no hurry to comply with the order. He was a bald, whiskered giant, and at the moment was busily engaged in swilling dirty glasses in a sink filled with tepid water. This tavern, the Comrades' Tryst, had two rooms, each with its separate exit. Madame Corn presided over the first, in which food and drink were served. By passing through the door at the far end and crossing the inner courtyard of the large 7-story building, the second den was reached, a low and ill-lit room facing the rue de la Charbonnière, a street famed in the district for its bad reputation. At a third summons, Father Corn, who had sized up the girl and the crowd she was with, growled: "It'll be 2 moons. Hand over the stuff first." Big Ernestine rose, and pushing her way to him, began a long argument. When she stopped to draw a breath, Corn interposed: "It's no use trying that game. I said 2 francs, and 2 francs it is."
"All right, I won't argue with a brute like you," replied the girl. "Everyone knows that you and Mother Corn are Germans, dirty Prussians."
The innkeeper smiled quietly and went on washing his glasses. Big Ernestine glanced around the room. She knew the crowd and quickly decided that the cash would not be forthcoming. For a moment she thought of tackling old Mother Toulouche, ensconced in the doorway with her display of Portugals and snails, but Dame Toulouche, snuggled in her old shawl, was fast asleep. Suddenly, from a corner of the tavern, a weary voice cried with authority: "Go ahead, Corn. I'll stand treat." It was the sapper who had spoken, a man of 50 who owed his nickname to the current report that he had spent 20 years in Africa both as a soldier and a convict. While Ernestine and her friends hastened to his table, the sapper's companion, a heavily built man, rose carelessly and slouched off to join another group, muttering: "I'm too near the window here." "It's no net," explained the sapper to Ernestine. "He's home from New Caledonia, and he doesn't care to show himself much just now." The girl nodded, and pointing to one of her companions, became confidential.
"Look at poor Mimily here. He's just out of quad and has to start right off to do his service. Pretty tough."
The sapper became very interested in the conversation. Meanwhile, Nonet, as he crossed the tap room, had stopped a few moments before a pretty girl who was evidently expecting someone.
"Waiting for the square again, Josephine?" Nonet inquired.
The girl, whose big blue eyes contrasted strikingly with her jet black hair, replied:
"Why not? Loupart isn't thinking of quitting me that I know of." "Well, when he does, let me know," Nonet suggested smilingly.
Josephine shrugged her shoulders contemptuously and, glancing at the clock above the bar, rose suddenly and left the tap room. She went rapidly down the rue Charbonnière and along the boulevard, in the direction of the Barbès Metropolitan Station. On reaching the level of the boulevard Magenta, she slackened and walked along the right-hand pavement toward the center of Paris. "My little Jojo!" The girl, who after leaving the tavern had assumed a quiet and modest air, now came face to face with a stout gentleman with a jovial face and one gleaming eye, the other eye being permanently closed. He wore a beard turning gray, and his derby hat and light cane placed him as belonging to the middle class. "How late you are, my adored Jojo," he murmured tenderly. "That accursed workshop been keeping you again after hours?" The mistress of Loupart's checked a smile.
"That's it," she replied. "The workshop, M. Marchal."
The man addressed made a warning gesture. "Don't mention my name here. I'm almost home." He pulled out his watch. Too bad. I'll have to go in or my wife will kick up a row. Let's see, this is Tuesday. Well, Saturday I'm off to Burgundy on my usual half-monthly trip. Meet me at the Lyons Station, platform number 2, Marseille Express. We won't be back till Monday. A delightful weekend of love-making with my darling, who at last consents. What's that?" The stout man broke off his impassioned harangue. A beggar, emerging from the darkness, importuned him. "Have pity on me, kind sir." "Give him something," urged Josephine. The middle-aged lover complied and tenderly drew away the pretty girl, repeating carefully the details of the assignation. "Lyons Station, 8:15. The train leaves at 20 to 9." Then suddenly dropping Josephine's arm, "Now, sweetheart, you'd better hurry home to your good mother, and remember Saturday." The outline of the portly personage faded into the night. Loupart's mistress shrugged her shoulders, turned, and made her way back to the tryst where her place had been kept for her. At the back of the tavern, the group which Nonet had joined were discussing strange doings. The Bear, head of the band of the Cyphers, had just returned from the courthouse. He brought the latest news. Ribonneau had been given 10 years, but was going to try for a reduced sentence. The talk suddenly dropped. A hubbub arose outside, a dull roar which waxed louder and louder. The sound of hurrying footsteps mingled with shrill cries and oaths. Doors in the street slammed. A few shots were fired, followed by a pause, and then the stampede began again. Father Korn, deserting his bar, warily planted himself at the entry to his establishment, his hand on the latch of the door. He stood ready to bar entrance to any who might try to press in. "The raid," he warned in a low tone. His customers, glad to feel themselves in safety, followed the vicissitudes of what to them was almost a daily occurrence. First came the frenzied rush of the street walkers, deserted by their sinister protectors, and fleeing madly in search of shelter in terror of the lock-up. Behind the shrieking herd, the constables, in close ranks, swept and cleared the street, leaving no corner, no court, no door that remained ajar unsearched. Then the whirl swept away, the noise died down, and the street resumed its normal aspect, drab, weird, and alarming. Father Korn laughed. "All they've bagged is Bonsville," he cried, and the customers responded to his merriment. The police had been fooled again. Bonsville was a harmless old tramp who got himself jugged every winter on purpose to lay up for repairs. The passage of the driver had caused enough stir in the tap room to distract attention from the entry at the back of a stoutly built man with a bestial face, known by the title of the Cooper. Swiftly he passed to the Beard's table, and taking the latter side, began: "The big job is fixed for the end of the week. On my way back from the station I saw Josephine palavering with the swell customer." Suddenly the Beard stopped him short. The general attention had become fixed on the street entrance to the tap room. The door had opened with a loud bang, and Loupart, alias the Square, the popular lover of the pretty Josephine, came on the scene, his eyes gleaming, his lips smiling under his upturned mustache. Then there broke out cries of stupefaction. Loupart was between two policemen, who had stopped short in the doorway. The Square turned to them. "Thank you, gentlemen," he said in his most urbane tone. "I am very grateful to you for having seen me this far. I am quite safe now. Let me offer you a drink to the health of authority." However, the two policemen did not dare to enter the tavern, so they briefly declined and made off. Josephine had risen, and Loupart, after pressing a tender kiss upon her lips, turned to the company. "That pleases you, eh? I was just heading this way when I ran into the drive. As I'm a peaceful citizen, I got hold of two cops and begged them to see me safely home. They thought I was really scared." There was a burst of general laughter. No one could bluff the police like the Square. Loupart turned to Josephine. "How are things doing, ducky?" The girl repeated in a low tone to her lover her recent talk with Monsieur Marchal. Loupart noted approvingly, but grumbled when he found the meeting was fixed for Saturday. "Hang the fellow! Must hustle with all the jobs on hand this week. Anyway, we won't let this one slip by. Plenty of shiners, eh, Josephine?" "You bet. He carries the stuff to his partners every fortnight." "That's first rate. But in the meantime there's something doing to night. Here, Kitty, take a pen and scratch off a letter for me." The Square dictated in a low voice. "Sir, I'm only a poor girl, but I've some feeling and honesty, and I hate to see wrong done around me. Believe me, you'd better keep an eye open on someone pretty close to me. Maybe the police have already told you I am the mistress of Loupart, alias the Square. I'm not denying it. In fact, I'm proud of it. Well, I swear to you that this Loupart is going to try a dirty game." Josephine stopped writing. "Look here, what are you at?" "Scribble and don't bother yourself. This doesn't concern you," replied Loupart dryly. Josephine waited docile and ready, but the Square's attention was now focused upon Ernestine, her young man, and the generous sapper.
"Yes," Ernestine was explaining to Mimile, while the sapper nodded approvingly. "The Beard is, as you might say, the head of the band of ciphers, next to Loupart, of course. To belong to the Beard's gang, you've got to have done up at least one guy. Then you get your number one. Your figure increases according to the number of debtors you have to your credit." "So then," inquired Mimile with eager curiosity, "Ribonneau, who has just been sentenced, is called number 7 because—" "Because," added the sapper in his serious voice, "because he has killed off 7." In a few curt questions the Square posted himself as to young Mimile, who had impressed him favorably. Josephine turned to Loupart. "What else am I to put in the letter? Why are you stopping?" For answer the Square suddenly sprang to his feet, seized a half empty bottle and flung it on the floor, where it broke. This act of violence sent the company scattering, and Loupart roared out: "It's on account of spies that I'm stopping, by God! When are we going to see their finish? And besides," he added, staring hard at Ernestine, "I've had enough of all this nonsense. Better clear out of here or there'll be trouble." Cunningly, with bloodshot eyes, her fists clenched in fury, but humbly submissive, the girl made ready to comply. She knew the Square was master, and there was no use standing out against his will. The sapper himself, growling, picked up his change, little disposed to have a row, and beckoning to his comrade Nonet, effected a humble exit under the cover of the girl Ernestine. Loupart's arm fell upon the shoulder of Mimile, who alone seemed to defy Josephine's formidable lover. "Hold on, young 'un," ordered Loupart. "You seem to have some nerve. Better join us." Mimile's eyes lighted up with joy. "Oh," he stammered, "Loupart, you'll take me in the cipher gang?"
"Maybe," was the enigmatic reply. Then with a shove he sent the young man to the back of the den. "Must go and talk it over with the Beard." Without paying heed to the thanks of his new recruit, Loupart continued his dictation to Josephine. As the sapper and Nonet went quickly down the rue Charbonnier, Nonet inquired:
"Well, Chief, what do you think of our evening?"
The individual that the hooligans of La Chapelle knew by the nickname of the Sapper, and who was no other than Inspector Michel, slowly stroked his long beard. "Not much," he declared, "except that we've been bluffed by the Square."
"Why not round up the bunch?"
suggested Nonet, who was known as Inspector Léon. "It's easy enough to talk, but what can 2 do against 20? Who wants to take such risks for $60 a month?" In the meantime, Josephine was writing at the Square's dictation. "I know, sir, that to morrow Loupart will be at Garnet's wine shop at 7 o'clock, which you know is to the right as you go up the Faubourg Montmartre before you reach the rue Lamartine. From there he will go to Dr. Chalec's to tackle the safe, which is placed, as I told you, at the far side of the study, facing the window with its balcony overlooking the garden. I wouldn't have meddled in the matter except that there'll be something worse regarding a woman. I can't tell you any more, for this is all I know. Make the best of it, and for God's sake never let Loupart know the letter was sent to you by the undersigned. Very respectfully." About to sign her name, Josephine looked up, trembling and anxious.
"What does it mean, Loupart? You've been drinking. I'm sure you have."
"Sign, I tell you," calmly replied the Square, and the girl, hypnotized, proceeded to trace in her large clumsy hand her name, Josephine Ramot. "Now put it in an envelope." From the end of the saloon the Beard was signaling Loupart. "What is it?" the latter cried, annoyed at the interruption. The Beard came near and whispered: "Important business. The dockman's scheme is going well. It'll be for the end of the week, Saturday at the latest." "In 4 days, then?" "In 4 days." "All right," declared Josephine's lover. "We'll be on hand. It'll be a big haul, I hear." 50,000 at least, the cooper told me. Loupart nodded, waved the Beard aside, and resumed: Address it to Monsieur Juve, Commissioner of Safety, at the Prefecture, Paris. End of Chapter 1 of The Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Silvestre. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Of The Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Silvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 2. On the Track. The daily paper, The Capital, was about to go to press. The editors had handed over the last strips of copy with the latest news. "Well, Fandor," asked the secretary, "nothing more for me?" "No, nothing." "You won't spring a latest on me?" "Not unless the President of the Republic should be assassinated." "Right enough. But don't joke. Lord, there's something else to be done just now." The setter-up appeared in the editors' rooms. "I want sharp type for 1 and 8 lines for 2." Discreetly, as a man accustomed to the business, Fandor withdrew on hearing the request of the setter-up, avoiding the searching glance of the sub-editor, who forthwith, to meet the demands of the paging, called at random one of the reporters and passed on the order to him. "Some lines of special type, 8 lines. Take up the Cretan question on the Havas telegrams. Be quick." Fandor picked up his hat and stick and left the office. His berth as police reporter meant a constantly active and unsettled existence. He was never his own master, never knew 10 minutes beforehand what he was going to do, whether he might go home, start on a journey, interview a minister, or risk his life by an investigation in the world of thugs and cutthroats. "Deuce take it!" he cried as he passed the office door and saw what the time was. "I simply must go to the courts, and it's already very late." He ran forward a few paces, then stopped short. "And that porter murdered at Belleville! If I don't cover that affair, I shall have nothing interesting to turn in." He retraced his steps, looking for a cab, and swearing at the narrowness of the rue Montmartre, where the inadequate pavements forced the foot passengers to overflow onto the roadway, which was choked with costermongers' carts, heavy motor buses, and all that swarm of vehicles which gives a Paris street an air of bustle unequalled in any other capital in the world. As he was about to pass the corner of the rue Bergère, a porter laden down with sample boxes, strung on a hook, ran into him, almost knocking him down. "Look out yourself," replied the man insolently. Fandor, with an angry shrug of his shoulders, was about to pursue his way when the man stopped him. "Sir, can you direct me to the rue de Cresson?" "Follow the rue Montmartre and take the second turning to the right." "Thank you, sir. Could you give me a light?" Fandor could not repress a smile. He held out his cigarette. "Here, is that all you want to day?" "Well, you might offer me a drink." Fandor was about to answer sharply when something in the man's face seemed vaguely familiar. He was about 60, his clothes were threadbare and green with age, his shoes down at the heels, his moustache and shaggy beard a dirty yellow. "Why the devil should I stand you a drink?" "A good impulse, Monsieur Fandor." In a moment the man's features seemed to change. He appeared quite a different person, and Fandor recognised who was speaking to him. Accustomed by long habit to conceal his impressions, the journalist spoke nonchalantly. "All right, let's go to the Grand Charlemagne." They started off together, reached the Faubourg Montmartre, and entered a small wine shop. Having taken their seats and ordered drinks, Fandor turned to the porter. "What's up?" he asked. "It takes you a long time to recognise your friends." Fandor scrutinised his companion. "You are wonderfully made up, Juve." On hearing his name mentioned, the man gave a start. "Don't utter my name. They know me here as old Paul." "But why the disguise? Who are you after? Is it anything to do with Fantomas?" Juve shrugged his shoulders. "Let's leave Fantomas out of it," he said. "At least for the moment. No, my lad, it's a very commonplace affair to day, and I wouldn't have bumped into you except that I have an hour to while away and wanted your company." "This disguise for a commonplace affair?" cried Fandor. "Come, Juve, don't keep me in the dark." Juve laughed at his friend's eagerness. You'll always be the same. When it's a matter of detective work, there's no keeping you out of it. Well, here's the information you're after. Read that." He passed Fandor a greasy, ill-written letter. Fandor took it in at a glance. "This refers to Loupart, alias the Square?" "Yes." "And you call it a commonplace affair? But look here, can you trust information given by a loose woman?" "My dear Fandor, the police largely depend upon such tips, given through revenge by women of that class." "Well, I'm going with you." "No, I won't have you mixed up in this business. It's too dangerous." "All the more reason for my being in it. What is really known about this Loupart?" "Very little, unfortunately," rejoined Juve. "And it's the mystery surrounding him which makes us uneasy. Although he has been involved in some of the worst crimes, he has always managed to escape arrest. He is supposed to be one of an organized gang. In any case, he's a resolute scoundrel who wouldn't hesitate to draw his gun in case of need." Fandor nodded. "His arrest will make bully copy." "And for the pleasure of writing a sensational story, you want to put your life in peril again?" Juve smiled sympathetically as he spoke. He had known the young journalist when, scarcely grown up, he had been involved in the weird affairs of Fantômas. Fandor was an assumed name. Juve recalled the young Charles Rambert, victim of the mysterious Fantômas, the most redoubtable ruffian of modern times, whom Juve declared to be the Gurn and still alive, although Gurn had supposedly died on the scaffold. He recalled the sensational trial and the terrible revelations that had appalled society. Gurn he had then affirmed to be the lover of the Englishwoman, Lady Beltham. Gurn it was who had killed her husband, and Gurn was no other than Fantômas. He recalled the tragical morning when Gurn, in the very shadow of the scaffold, had found means to send in his stead an innocent victim, Valgrand the actor. "When will you begin to draw in your net?" inquired Fandor. Juve motioned to his companion to be silent and listen. "Fandor, you hear what that man's singing, the one drinking at the bar?" "Yes, the Blue Danube." "Well, that gives me the answer. We shall soon be on Loupart's tracks. By the way, are you armed?" "If you won't run me in for carrying concealed weapons, I'll confess that baby Browning is in my pocket." "Good. Now, then, listen to my directions. Loupart was seen at the markets this morning by two of my watchers, and you may be sure he hasn't been lost sight of since. Reports I have received indicate that he will presumably go to the Chateaudun crossroads, and from there to the Place Pigalle, in the direction of Dr. Chalec's house. We shall nab him at the crossroads. Needless to say, we are not going to keep together. As soon as our man comes in sight, you will pass on ahead, walking at his pace, on the same pavement, and without turning around." "And if Loupart doesn't appear?" "Why then," began Juve. "The deuce! There's another customer whistling the Blue Danube. It's time to be off." "Are those your agents whistling?" asked Fandor as they left the shop. "No." "What? Isn't it a signal?" "It is, and you'll be able to find your trail by the passers by who whistle that air." While talking, the journalist and the detective arrived at the Chateaudun crossroads. Juve cast an eye over the ground. "It's 6 o'clock. Be off and prowl round Notre Dame de Lorette. Loupart will probably come out of that wine shop you see to the right. You can easily recognize him by his height and a scar on his left cheek." "Look here, Juve, why should these people whistle the Blue Danube if they are not detectives?" Juve smiled. "It's quite simple. If you whistle a popular tune in a crowd, someone is bound to take it up. Well, the two men I put to watching Loupart this morning were whistling this same tune, and now we are meeting persons who caught the air." Fandor crossed the road and proceeded toward Notre Dame de Lorette, to the post the detective had allotted to him. The manhunt was about to begin. End of Chapter 2. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 3. Behind the Curtain. The Cité for Show is shut in by low stone walls, topped by grating, round which creepers intertwine. The entry to its main thoroughfare, shaded by trees and lined with small private houses, is not supposed to be public, and a porter's lodge to the right of the entrance is intended to enforce its private character. It was about 7 in the evening. As the fine spring day drew to a close, Fandor reached the square of the Cité. For an hour past, the journalist had been wholly engaged in keeping track of the famous Loupart, who, after leaving the saloon, had sauntered up the rue des Martyrs, his hands in his pockets and a cigarette in his mouth. Fandor allowed him to pass at the corner of the rue Claude, and from there on kept him in view. Juve had completely disappeared. As Loupart, followed by Fandor, was about to enter the Cité Frochot, an exclamation made them both turn. Fandor perceived a poorly dressed man anxiously searching for something in the gutter. A curious crowd had instantly collected, and word was passed round that the lost object was a 25-franc gold piece. Fandor, joining the crowd, was pushed close to the man, who quickly whispered: "Idiot, keep out of the Cité." The owner of the gold piece was no other than the detective. Then, under cover of loud complaint, Juve muttered to Fandor: "Let him go. Watch the entrance to the Cité." "But," objected Fandor in the same key, "what if I lose sight of him?" "No fear of that. The doctor's house is the second on the right." The hooligan, who had for a moment drawn near the crowd, was now heading straight for the Cité. Juve went on: "In a quarter of an hour at the latest, join me again, 27 rue Victor Massé." "And if Loupart should enter the Cité in the meantime?" "Come straight back to me." Fandor was moving off when Juve addressed him out loud: "Thank you, kind gentleman, but as you are so charitable, give me something more, for God's sake." The other drew near the pretended beggar, and Juve added: "If anyone questions you as you pass through, say you are going to Aumarel, the decorator's. You'll find me on the stairs." Some moments later, the little crowd had melted away, and a policeman, arriving as usual too late, wondered what had been going on. Fandor carried out Juve's instructions to the letter. Hiding behind a sentry box, he kept an eye on the doctor's house, but nothing out of the way happened. Loupart had vanished, though he was probably not far away. When the 15 minutes were up, Fandor left his post and entered No. 27 rue Victor Massé. As he reached the 3rd floor, he heard Juve's voice: "Is that you, lad?" "Yes." "The porter didn't question you?" "I've seen no one." "All right, come up here." Juve was seated at a hall window examining Dr. Chalec's house through a field glass. "You have not seen Loupart go in?" he inquired as Fandor joined him. "Not while I was on watch." "It's well to know one's Paris and have friends everywhere, isn't it?" continued Juve. "It occurred to me quite suddenly that this might be an excellent place from where to follow citizen Loupart's doings. You would have spoiled everything if you had followed him to the Cité. That's why I devised my little scheme to hold you back." "You are right," admitted Fandor, who, the next moment, gave a jump as Juve's hand gripped him hard. "Look, Fandor, the bird is going into the cage." The journalist, excited, saw a figure already familiar to him in the act of slipping into the little garden which separated Dr. Chalec's house from the main thoroughfare. The detective went on: "There he goes, skirting the house until he reaches the little door hidden in the wall. What's he up to now? Ah, he's fumbling in his pocket. False keys, of course." They saw Loupart open the door and make his way into the house. "What comes next?" inquired Fandor. "We are going to tighten the net which the silly bird has hopped into," rejoined Juve, as he bolted down the stairs, and added as a precautionary measure: "While I question the porter, you slip by me into the main street. I have every reason to believe that Monsieur Chalec has been absent for 2 days, and as soon as I get this information, I shall pretend to go away, and then the rest is my concern." Juve's programme was carried out in all points. To his questions, the porter replied: "Why, sir, I can't really say. I saw Dr. Chalec go off with his bag, and I haven't seen him come back. However, if you care to see for yourself..." "No, thanks," replied Juve.
I'll return in a few days, but look out, your lamp's flaring." As the porter turned to remedy the trouble, Juve, instead of going off to the right, quickly followed the direction Fandor had taken and caught up with the latter just outside Dr. Chaleck's house. "Now for our plan of campaign," he said. "It's darker now than it will be later when the street lamps are lit and the moon rises. That excellent Josephine sent me a rough plan of the house. You see, there are 2 windows on the ground floor on either side of the wall. Naturally, they belong to the dining room and drawing room. The window to the right, on the first floor, is evidently that of the bedroom. On the left, this window with a balcony belongs to the study of our dealer in death. That's where we must plant ourselves. Understand, Fandor?" The journalist nodded. "I understand." The 2 men advanced carefully, holding their breath and halting at every step. To catch the ruffian in the act, they must reach the study without giving the alarm. The first story of Dr. Chaleck's office was only slightly raised above the ground. By the aid of a drain pipe, Juve and Fandor managed without difficulty to hoist themselves onto the balcony. "Here's luck!" cried Juve. "The study window is wide open." After putting on a pair of rubbers and making Fandor remove his boots, the 2 men entered the room. Juve's first precaution was to test the 2 halves of the window. Finding that their hinges did not creak, he fastened the latch and drew the curtains. "We'll risk a light," he whispered, taking out a pocket lamp, which lit up the room sufficiently to allow him to take his bearings. The study was elegantly furnished. In the middle was a huge desk piled with papers, reports, and files. To the right of the desk, in the corner opposite the window, and half hidden by a heavy velvet curtain, was the door leading to the landing. A large corner sofa occupied the space of 2 wall panels. A set of bookshelves covered a whole wall. Here and there cosy armchairs invited meditation. "I don't see the famous safe," murmured Fandor. "That's because your eyes aren't trained," replied the detective. "Look at that corner sofa, topped by that richly carved bracket. Observe the thick appearance of the delicate mahogany panel. You may be quite sure that it hides a solid steel casket which the best tools would have no easy job to cut through. That little moulding you see to the right can be easily pushed aside." Here Juve, with the precision of an expert, set the woodwork in motion and showed the astonished Fandor a scarcely visible keyhole. "Now, let's put out the light and hide ourselves behind the curtains. Luckily, they are far enough from the window for our presence not to be noticed." For about an hour the men remained motionless, then, weary of standing, they squatted on the floor. Each had his revolver ready to hand. 10 had just struck from a distant clock, when suddenly a slight sound reached their attentive ears. The 2 had whiled away the time of waiting by drilling the curtains with a small penknife. These holes were visible at a distance, but enabled them to see what was going on in the room. The noise continued, slow and measured. Someone was walking about in the adjacent rooms without any attempt to disguise the sound. Evidently Loupart believed himself quite alone in the house of the absent doctor. The steps drew nearer, and Fandor, in spite of his courage, felt the rapid beating of his heart. The handle of the door leading from the hall to the study was turned, and some person entered the room. There was an instant of silence, and then the desk was suddenly lit up. The newcomer had found the switch. But he was not Loupart. He seemed a man of 40, and wore a brown beard, brushed fan shape. A noticeable baldness heightened his forehead. On his strongly arched nose a double eyeglass was balanced. Suddenly, having looked at the clock, which marked 11:30, he began to loosen his tie and unbutton his waistcoat, and then went out, leaving the study lit, as if intending to come back. "It's Chaleck!" exclaimed Fandor. "Just so," replied the detective. "And this complicates matters. We may have to protect him as well as his safe." Indeed, Juve's first impulse was to go straight to Dr. Chaleck, apprise him of the situation, and, under his guidance, search the house thoroughly. But that would have put Loupart on the alert. It would be taking too great a chance. If Juve should lay hands on him outside of Chaleck's house, he would have no right to hold him. For the subtle power of Loupart, that well-loved hooligan of the purlieus of Paris, lay in his remaining constantly a source of fear, always a suspect without ever being caught with the goods. Coming back to his first idea of ensuring Chaleck's safety, Juve said to himself: "The doctor is coming back here, that's sure, and we must protect him without his knowing it. That is the best plan for the present." Sure enough, after an absence of 10 minutes, Chaleck returned to the study and seated himself at his desk. He had now changed into his pyjamas. Time passed. When the little Empire timepiece which decorated the mantel struck 3, Fandor, for all his anxiety, could not repress a yawn. The night was long, and thus far had been devoid of incidents. From their hiding place, he and Juve kept an eye on Dr. Chaleck. When did the man sleep? Nothing in the physician's countenance betrayed the slightest weariness. He examined numerous documents spread out on the desk, and also wrote a letter which he sealed by lighting a candle and melting some wax. He lingered a good 20 minutes afterwards, then finally put out the lights and left the room. The room was now in total darkness. The journalist and the detective listened a few moments longer as a precaution, but nothing happened to break the hush of the waning night. Half an hour more, and the outlines of the two would be visible on the thin curtains. It was high time to be off. Fandor and Juve rose with difficulty to their feet, so cramped were their legs from the enforced rigidity. "What now?" asked Fandor. "Listen!" Juve abruptly gripped the other's arm as a fresh noise came to their ears. This time it was not the footsteps of a man walking carelessly, but weird creakings, sly gropings. The noise stopped, began again, and again stopped. Where did it come from? "This room's a mass of hangings," muttered Juve. "It's impossible to locate those sounds or determine their origin." "You would suppose," began Fandor, but he stopped short. The door had opened, the light was switched on, and Dr. Chaleck appeared once more, probably disturbed in his sleep by the mysterious noises. Chaleck gave a quick glance round the room, and then, to the consternation of the two men, he took a few steps toward the window, revolver in hand. At this moment dull creakings were heard, apparently coming from the landing. Chaleck turned quickly, and, leaving the door open, went out. An increase of light indicated that the other rooms in the house were being searched, and as the lights were gradually switched off again, it was apparent that Chaleck was concluding his domiciliary visit without having noticed anything abnormal. The two remained still for an hour longer, although they had heard Chaleck go back to his room and lock himself into it. Meantime the daylight was growing brighter, and in a little while the neighbourhood would be awake. "We must slip out," decreed Juve, as he turned the hasp of the window with infinite care and set it ajar to reach the balcony. A few moments later, Juve had shed his disguise, and the two men drew breath in the middle of the Place Pigalle, having fled ignominiously like common criminals. End of Chapter 3. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com Of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Silvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 4. A Woman's Corpse.
"Well, Juve, I suppose you'll agree with me that Josephine's information was a piece of pure fiction,"
said Fandor, as they turned into the rue Pigalle.
"You are talking nonsense," replied Juve.
"But," protested the other, "we arrived punctually at the place appointed, and most assuredly nothing happened there."
"We were punctual, it is true, but so was Loupart. Josephine's letter gave us 2 items of information: that her lover would be at Dr. Chaleck's house, and that he would rob the safe. Events have proved her correct in one case. As to the second, while he did not break open the safe, nothing proves that he had not that intention. He may have been frustrated by the unexpected appearance of Dr. Chaleck, or he may have discovered that we were following him." At this moment Fandor pointed out to Juve 3 men who were running toward them, violently gesticulating.
"What does that mean?" he asked.
Before Juve could reply, one of the men, much out of breath, inquired: "Well, chief?"
"Why, it's Michel and Henri and Léon."
Then, turning to Fandor, he explained:
3 inspectors."
Michel repeated the question:
"Well, chief, what's up?"
"What do you mean?"
"You've just come from the Cité Fréchot, chief?"
Juve was amazed.
"Look here," he said. "Where do you come from, Michel? The Prefecture?"
"No, chief, from the head office of number 9.
"Then how did you know we were at the Cité Fréchot?"
Taken aback, Michel replied:
Why, from seeing you here, after the affair."
"What affair?" insisted Juve.
"Well, chief, it's this way. The three of us were on duty this morning at the Rue Rochefoucauld station. About 20 minutes ago the telephone rang, and I heard a woman asking in a broken and choked voice if it was the police station. On my answering it was, she begged me to come to the rescue, crying, 'Murder! I'm dying!'"
"What then?" questioned Juve.
"Then I asked who was speaking, but unfortunately Central had cut me off."
"You made inquiries?"
"Yes, chief, and after a quarter of an hour Central told me that only one subscriber had called up the police station, the number being 928-12, name of Dr. Chaleck in the Cité Frochot."
"I suppose you asked for the number again?"
"I did, but I could get no reply."
After a pause, during which Juve was lost in thought, the officer added timidly:
"We'd better hurry if a crime has been committed."
Juve beckoned Michel to him.
"There are too many of us," he said. "You come along, Michel. The other two must go back to the station and be ready to join us in case of need."
The two officers and Fandor went hurriedly up the rue Pigalle and came to a halt by Dr. Chaleck's door. A loud ringing brought no reply. It was repeated, and finally a voice cried: "Who is there? What's the matter?"
"Open!"
ordered Juve.
"To whom do you wish to speak?"
"To Dr. Chaleck." And Juve added: "Open! It's the police."
"The police? What the deuce do they want with me?"
"You'll soon find out," answered Michel. "Do you suppose we'd be making this row if we were criminals?" Doubtless convinced by this reasoning, Dr. Chaleck decided at length to open his door.
"What do you want with me?" he repeated.
Juve quickly explained matters.
"We've just had a telephone message to say that some ruffians, possibly murderers, are in your house."
"Murderers!" cried Chaleck in amazement. "But whom could they murder? I'm living here alone."
At this assertion, Juve, Fandor, and Michel looked at each other, mystified.
"Well, in any case, we must search your house from top to bottom," said Juve, and added as an afterthought: "I suppose you are thoroughly satisfied that we come with honest intentions?"
Dr. Chaleck smiled.
"Oh, Inspector Juve's features are well known to me, and I place myself entirely at his disposition."
The three men, led by Chaleck, ransacked all the rooms on the ground floor, finding nothing suspicious. They then went up to the floor above.
"I have only 3 more rooms to show you, gentlemen," said the doctor: "my bathroom, my bedroom, and my study."
The bathroom disclosed nothing of interest, and Chaleck, throwing open the door of another room, announced: "My study." Scarcely had Fandor set foot in the study from which he and Juve had so recently made their escape, when a cry burst from his lips:
"Good God, how horrible!"
The apartment was in the greatest disorder. Overturned chairs bore witness to a violent struggle. One of the mahogany panels of the desk had been partly smashed in. A window curtain was torn and hanging, and the small gas stove was broken. Fandor, at the first glance, saw what appeared to be a long trail of blood extending from the window to the desk. Stepping forward quickly, he discovered the body of a woman, frightfully crushed and covered with blood.
"Dead some time!" cried Fandor. "The body is cold, and the blood already congealed."
Juve tranquilly examined the room, and took in its tragic horror.
"The telephone apparatus is overturned," he muttered to himself. "There has been a struggle between the victim and the murderer. Ah! Theft was the object of the crime."
"Theft?"
cried Dr. Chaleck, coming forward.
"Look, doctor, your safe has been overturned, broken in, and ransacked," answered Juve, as he and Fandor cautiously lifted the woman. The body was a mass of contusions, and appeared to be one large wound. Juve turned to the doctor, who, livid with consternation, was holding up a small grey linen bag which had contained his bonds. "Come, doctor, calm yourself and give us some information. Can you make anything of it?"
"Nothing! Nothing! I heard nothing! Who is this woman? I don't know her!"
Fandor pointed to a small shoe lying in a corner.
"A fashionable woman," he said.
"Quite so,"
was Juve's reply, and putting his hands on Chaleck's shoulders, he inquired:
"A friend of yours, a mistress, eh? Come now, don't deny it."
"Deny?" protested the doctor. "Deny what? You're not accusing me, are you? I know nothing of what has taken place here, and, as you see, have been robbed into the bargain."
"Is she a patient of yours?"
"I don't practise."
"A visitor, perhaps?"
No one has been to see me today."
"It is not your maid?"
"No, I tell you. I am living here all by myself." "Have you noticed this, sir?" put in Michel, as he gave Juve a handkerchief on which some viscous grey substance was spread in thick layers.
"Shoemaker's wax,"
Juve explained, after a brief glance at it.
"That explains the burns we noticed. The murderer covered his victim's face with the handkerchief to prevent identification."
Then, turning to Fandor, he went on in a low tone:
"But it doesn't explain how and when the crime was committed. Less than an hour ago we were in this very room, and the burgling of the safe alone would take fully an hour."
Michel, ignorant of this fact, was for arresting the doctor. "Look here," he said sharply to Chaleck, "we've had enough yarns from you, now tell us the truth." "But, good God, I have told you the truth!" cried Chaleck. "And you heard nothing, although you were only a few yards away?" "Nothing at all. I sat up working very late last night. When I went to bed, nothing had happened in the least suspicious. Oh, by the way, toward morning I did hear a slight noise. I rose and went over the house, even coming into this room. I found everything in order." "That's a likely tale." "Here's proof of what I say. When I returned to the study, I used that candle and sealing wax to seal my letter, which, as you can see, is still here. Your ring at the bell awoke me not more than 20 minutes later, just as I was getting to sleep again." "Lies!" cried Michel, turning to Juve. "Shall I arrest him?"
"The doctor is telling the truth," replied Juve, half regretfully.
Chaleck seemed very much relieved. "Oh, you'll help me, won't you? Get me out of this abominable affair." As a matter of fact, Chaleck had accounted for his time with exact truthfulness. Juve crossed the room and drew aside the curtains. Upon the floor he pointed out to Fandor traces of mud. It was there that he and the journalist had stood.
"Doctor," said Juve at length, "I must ask you not to go out this morning. I am going to headquarters to ask them to send experts in anthropometry. We must photograph in detail the appearance of your study. Then I will come back and make an extended inquiry, and I shall want you. Michel, remain here with the doctor."
Without further words, Juve, followed by Fandor, left the house of mystery, jumped into the first cab that passed, and, mopping his forehead, cried:
"It's astounding! This murder presents mysteries worthy of Fantomas himself."
End of Chapter 4. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Silvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 5. Loupart's Anger. Loupart was taking a fruit cure. It was about 10 in the morning, and along the rues Charbonnier, Chartres, and Goutte d'Or, the women hawkers, driven from central Paris by the police, were making for the high ground of the populous quarters. Loupart strolled along the pavement, making grabs at the barrows, picking a handful of strawberries or cherries as he went by. If by chance the dealer complained, she was quickly silenced by a chaffing speech or a stern glance. The hooligans stopped at the Comrades' Tryst, in front of which Mother Toulouche had set out a table with a large basket of winkles.
"Want to try them?"
suggested the old woman, on catching sight of Josephine's lover. "Hand me a pin," he answered harshly, and in a few moments had emptied half a dozen shells.
"Friend Square, I've something to say to you."
"Out with it, then." But before the old woman could reply, a noise of roller skates coming down the pavement made her turn. Loupart turned round with a smile. "Why, here comes the autobus!" he cried. A cripple, moving at a great pace, came plump into the basket of shellfish. The speed at which he travelled had earned him the name of the Motor. He was said to be an old railway mechanic who had lost both legs in an accident.
"Motor," cried Mother Toulouche, "I have to be away for 10 minutes or so. Look after my basket, will you?"
Following the old dame to her den, Loupart entered with difficulty, on account of the great quantity of heterogeneous objects with which it was crowded. The product of innumerable thefts lay heaped up pell-mell in this illicit bazaar. Dame Toulouche, having shut the door, plunged into her subject.
"Big Ernestine is furious with you, Loupart."
"If she's threatening me," the hooligan replied, "I'll soon fix her."
No, big Ernestine didn't want to fight, but she was annoyed at the public affront put upon her by Josephine's lover when he drove her from the Good Comrades the evening before last without any reason.
"Without any reason," growled Loupart. "Then what was her business with those spies, the sapper and Nonette?"
That can't be! Not the sapper!
"Spies, I tell you. They belong to headquarters." The old receiver of stolen goods cast up her eyes.
And they looked such decent people, too! Who can one trust?"
Loupart, for reply, suddenly picked up a scarf pin set with a diamond, and tossing the old woman a $5 piece, said as he left the room: "You can tell Ernestine that I bear her no malice." Loupart had hardly gone a few steps along the rue Charbonnier, when at the corner of the rue de Chartres he bumped into a passer by who was coming down the street. Loupart burst out laughing. "What, can this be you, Beard? What's happened to you?" It certainly needed a practised eye to recognise the famous leader of the cipher gang, for the Beard, who owed his name to an abnormal hairy development, was clean shaved. In addition, he wore a soft greenish hat, and was clad in a suit with big checks. "You told me to make up as an American." "I did, and you've made yourself look like a hayseed juggins. For heaven's sake, take it off. By the way, what about young Mimile?"
"He's with us."
"Well, get him the togs of a collegian for the job at the docks. What night do we bring it off?"
"Saturday, unless the Cooper changes the time."
Loupart bent close to the ear of his lieutenant. "Is he easy to recognise?"
"No chance of making an error. Lean, togged in dark clothes, and with one goggle eye."
Loupart touched the Beard's arm. "First class tickets for everybody."
"How many will there be?"
5 or 6.
"Women too?"
"No, only my girl, but you can bet we shan't be bored." With these words Loupart walked away. He stopped a little later at the second house in the rue Goutte d'Or, a decent looking house with carpet on the stairs. On reaching the 5th floor, he knocked several times on the door facing him, but without reply. This annoyed him. He didn't like Josephine to sleep late, and he expected her to be always ready when he condescended to come and fetch her. Josephine was a pretty burnisher from Belleville, and Loupart, who had met her at a ball in that quarter 6 months ago, had made her his favourite mistress. Among the bullies and drabs that frequented the place, Josephine had appeared to him seductive, charming, almost virginal, and the popular hooligan had promptly chosen her from her sisters of the underworld. Certainly Josephine had no reason to complain of her lover's conduct, and if at times he demanded of her a blind submission, he never treated her with that fierce brutality which characterized most of his fellows. But if Josephine had felt any leaning toward a good life or any scruples of conscience, she must necessarily have thrown them overboard as soon as her connection with Loupart began. With a different start in life she might have become an honest little woman, but circumstances made her the mistress of a hooligan ringleader, and, everything considered, she had a certain pride in being so, without imitating the vulgar and brutal behaviour of her companions. At the third summons, Loupart, none too patient, drove the door in with a vigorous shove of his shoulders. Josephine's apartment, a comfortable and spacious room with a fine bird's eye view of Paris, was empty. Fancying his mistress was at some neighbour's gossiping, he bawled: "Josephine, come here!" Heads appeared, looking anxiously out of rooms on the same floor. "Where is Josephine?" Loupart cried. Madame Guinon came forward. "I don't know," she replied, stammering. "She complained of pains in her stomach last evening, and I was told she's gone." "Gone? Gone where?" stormed Loupart.
"Why, I don't know. It was Julie who told me."
A freckled face, half hidden by a matted shock of hair, appeared. Julie was not reticent like her mother. She explained in a hoarse, alcoholic voice:
"It's quite simple. When I came in last night about 4, I heard groans in Josephine's room. I went to see and found Josephine writhing in pain, as if she'd been poisoned."
"What did you do then?"
"Oh, nothing," declared Julie. "I just trotted away again. It wasn't my business. But the Flirt came and meddled in it."
"The Flirt? Where is she?" The Flirt, a faded, wrinkled woman of 50, appeared from a doorway where she had been listening. "Where is Josephine?" demanded Loupart.
"At Laboursier Hospital, Ward 22, since you want to know."
After a moment's amazement, Loupart broke out furiously: "You sent off Josephine in the middle of the night? You took her to a hospital for a little indigestion, without asking my consent? Why, she's no more ill than I am."
"Have to believe she is," replied the Flirt, "since the probes have kept her."
Loupart turned and tramped downstairs, swearing:
"She'll come out of that a damned sight quicker than she went in."
A few moments later, Loupart entered Father Corn's saloon. Having set forth his plans to that worthy, the latter proceeded to demolish them. "You can't do anything to day, so there's no use trying. You'll have to wait till to morrow at midday, the proper visiting hour." Loupart recognized the truth of the publican's assertion, and calling for writing paper, sat down and scrawled a letter to his mistress. "Motor," he cried to the cripple, who was still at Mother Toulouche's basket, "tumble along with this note to Laraboisier. Look sharp, and when you get back, I'll stand you a glass." As the cripple hurried away, he was all but knocked down by a newsboy, running and shouting:
"Extra, extra! Get the capital! Extraordinary and mysterious crime of the Cité for show! Murder of a woman!"
"Shall I get a copy?" asked the publican. Loupart stalked out of the saloon without turning. "Oh, I know all about that!" he cried. Father Corn stood rooted to the spot at Loupart's answer. "What? He knows already?" End of Chapter 5. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com.